The first time my mom said she prayed I wouldn't end up like her, I was 6 years old. I didn't understand what she meant back then, but the weight in her voice made me afraid to ask. Years later, I'd learned that her life had been stolen from her long before she had me. She grew up in Greenville, Alabama in the late 1950s, a time and place where the color of your skin decided who you could love. My mom, a white teenager named Margaret, fell in love with my dad, Thomas, a black boy who worked afternoons at the sawmill. They were young, reckless, and stupidly hopeful, sneaking glances across the grocery store aisles and passing notes folded so tightly you could hide them in a palm. But their secret couldn't stay hidden forever. One night, when my mom was just 17, her father caught her kissing Thomas behind the diner. Within an hour, he and her brothers dragged Thomas into the street. They called it protecting bloodlines, but what they really wanted was to erase him. They beat him so badly he couldn't stand, then warned his family to get out of town or their house would burn next. By the end of that week, my mom was engaged to Richard Lawson, the town's golden boy. He was 23, clean-cut, from a respected church family. Everyone said he'd be a politician someday. But behind closed doors, Richard was a monster. He'd slam my mom against the wall for overcooking meatloaf. He'd backhand her across the face and then stroll into Sunday service with his arm around her like nothing had happened. The congregation praised him for being such a devoted husband while my mom wore long sleeves in August to hide the bruises. She tried telling her own mother once. "Richard hits me," she whispered through split lips. Her mother just shook her head and told her to be a better wife. That was the only advice she got. And Richard didn't just hit her. Every night, whether she wanted it or not, he reminded her that a husband had rights. She was 17, trapped, and expected to be grateful. But she wasn't done fighting. Months after the forced wedding, Mom found her way back to Thomas. She'd spotted him near the colored grocery store. At first he was terrified. He thought she'd been sent to trick him, to lure him into another beating. But she begged him to meet her at the cemetery at night, where no one ever looked twice at shadows. That's where they started leaving letters under headstones, scraps of paper filled with confessions and desperation. She told him everything, about Richard's abuse, about the forced intimacy, about how her parents pretended not to see the bruises. And Thomas told her what really happened after that night, how her father had spread lies about him, called him a predator, told the whole town he'd abandoned her by choice. Through those letters, they fell in love all over again. On nights when Richard passed out drunk, Thomas would sneak to the back of the house just to hold her hand through the window screen. That simple touch, fingers brushing through mesh, was the only tenderness she felt in months. And that's when they made a dangerous plan. If she got pregnant, Richard would be forced to ease up. He wouldn't dare hit a pregnant woman, and those 9 months would give Thomas time to save money for their escape. So on the nights Richard was too drunk to notice, Thomas would sneak in. They risked everything for a child they believed could save them both. It worked. A few weeks later, my mom realized she was pregnant. Richard didn't stop hurting her, but he changed how he did it. He shoved her into walls but never touched her stomach. He grabbed her by the hair, left bruises along her arms and back, forced her to wear loose dresses so nobody could see. And at church, he put his hand on her belly and smiled like he was the proudest man alive. People congratulated him while she bit her tongue bloody. But if my mom thought things were unbearable then, she was wrong. Because the day I was born, everything shattered. The room went silent when the doctor lifted me up. The nurses glanced at one another. My mom looked at my skin, not white like Richard's, not a secret that could be explained away. In that moment, every lie collapsed. Richard's face went from confusion to rage. My mother said the look in his eyes told her exactly what he was planning to do. And her parents, standing frozen in the doorway, realized the whole town would know their perfect little story was over. And that wasn't the worst of it. Not even close. The silence in the delivery room still haunted my mom for years. She said it felt like the walls themselves were closing in on her, every eye locked on the truth written across my newborn skin. Richard didn't say a word in front of the nurses. Didn't scream, didn't strike her there. He just stared at her with eyes full of murder, lips curled into the kind of smile that promised something far worse than yelling. My mom swore she could feel his rage vibrating in the air. The ride home was like being driven straight into hell. Richard gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles went white, his jaw clenched so hard the veins bulged in his neck. My mom kept her eyes on me in her lap, praying he wouldn't speak, praying he wouldn't stop the car and finish what he wanted to do. But once the front door shut behind them, the mask came off. Richard beat her worse than ever before. She couldn't walk for days afterward. Could barely even hold me long enough to feed me. And through his slurred words and clenched fists, he kept repeating the same threat: accidents happen to babies all the time. Her parents saw her condition when they visited. Her mother's eyes flickered across the bruises, the swelling, the way my mom struggled just to sit upright. But instead of helping, instead of protecting her own daughter, she only sighed. "We'll fix this mess," she whispered to Richard. "Nobody has to know." That was the moment my mom said she realized the truth: she and I were disposable. Her parents would let Richard destroy us both if it meant protecting their reputation. So even with her ribs still aching, stitches tugging at her skin, she began planning again. Not just for herself this time. For me. Every night, she listened for the rhythm of Richard's snores. Every day, she traced the bruises fading into her skin like a map of survival. And when she could finally stand without help, she started hiding scraps of money in my baby blanket, notes written in code tucked into the seams. But then, one morning, everything changed. Thomas, the man she loved, the man who was supposed to save her, was gone. No letters at the cemetery. No shifts at the mill. No trace at the grocery store. It was as if he'd been swallowed by the earth. My mom panicked. Had Richard found out? Had her parents paid someone again, like they had that first night? She couldn't search openly without drawing suspicion. Couldn't ask questions without risking everything. All she could do was wait, with me in her arms and Richard's rage pressing down heavier than ever. Weeks stretched into eternity. She told me later that every time I cried, she braced for Richard's hand to reach for me instead of her. She never let me out of her sight, even when her body begged for sleep. And then, just when she'd given up hope, just when she'd convinced herself Thomas must be dead, he came back. It was late. Richard passed out in his chair, bottle on the floor. My mom sat in the dark with me, her lips still swollen, her back raw from where he'd thrown her against the wall earlier. She heard the floor creak, thought it was Richard stirring, but when she turned her head, Thomas was standing in the doorway. She said he didn't speak a word at first. Just stared at her battered body, at me wrapped tight in a blanket, at Richard drooling in drunken oblivion. And then he crossed the room, scooped us both up, and carried us out like he'd been preparing for this moment his entire life. But freedom wasn't as simple as walking out the door. Because as Thomas drove us toward the edge of town, headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. And my mom realized Richard wasn't going to let us go. My mom always said running with me in her arms that night felt like déjà vu. Like she was reliving an old nightmare, only this time, the stakes were higher. She thought back to being 13, hiding under her bed while her father stormed through the house looking for her older cousin Ruth. Ruth had been caught sneaking out to meet a boy from the black side of town. My grandfather dragged her through the living room by her hair, shouting about tainted daughters and ruined families. Mom remembered pressing her palms over her ears, trying not to hear Ruth's screams as the front door slammed shut. By morning, Ruth was gone. Nobody ever mentioned her again. That memory clung to her now as she clutched me to her chest in Thomas's truck. She was terrified history was about to repeat itself, that she and I would simply disappear, and the town would erase us like they erased Ruth. Thomas's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, fresh cuts still on his hands. He hadn't even explained where he'd been until Mom finally asked through swollen lips, her voice trembling. "Where were you all this time?" His jaw tightened as he turned down a dirt road. "Locked up," he muttered. Then he admitted the truth. Richard's family had paid the sheriff to arrest him on false charges of vagrancy. 30 days in jail, timed perfectly so he couldn't be there when I was born. The red welts from shackles still marked his wrists. By the time they reached the edge of town, the gas gauge hovered near empty. Thomas had spent every cent he'd saved on bail. His sister Lucille was waiting on the porch of a rundown house, and she ushered them inside quickly. Her hands moved fast, cleaning Mom's wounds, making a bed on the floor, checking me over with a nurse's eye though she wasn't a nurse at all. She kept glancing at my skin, at the truth written in every feature, and her face hardened with determination. But safety didn't last long. Headlights swept across the window, and Thomas stiffened. Richard's car pulled into the yard, engine still running. He stumbled out with a shotgun in his hands. My mom froze, clutching me so tight I whimpered against her chest. Thomas shoved furniture against the door, while Lucille whispered, "I'll get help," before sprinting into the night. But when Mom peeked through the curtains, she saw the neighbors' houses going dark one by one. Doors locking. Curtains drawn. Nobody was going to stand against a white man with a gun. Richard's pounding rattled the door, his voice slurred but full of hate. "Bring me my wife. Bring me that baby. You're mine, both of you." The door shook with every hit. My cries echoed through the room. Then the pounding stopped. Thomas realized too late, Richard was circling to the back window. He told Mom to get down with me just as Richard raised the shotgun. The blast shattered glass, spraying shards across the kitchen floor. Thomas tackled him in the mud outside. They wrestled, each trying to grab the gun. Richard cursed, he spit flying, his rage unhinged. Thomas managed to wrench the shotgun free, but Richard pulled a pistol from his coat and fired. The bullet grazed Thomas's shoulder, sending blood down his arm. For a moment, my mom thought that was it. She thought we were finished. But then a neighbor's dog started barking, charging into the chaos, snapping and snarling. The distraction was just enough. Richard stumbled back toward his car, screaming that he'd be back with real help. Tires squealed as he tore down the dirt road. And in the distance, sirens began to wail. The law wasn't coming to protect them. They were coming to finish what Richard started. When the siren stopped outside Lucille's house, my mom knew they weren't there to protect us. They were Richard's blood, his cousins, his friends, his shield. The sheriff shoved his way inside with 2 deputies behind him. Their flashlights cut across the room, landing on Thomas's bleeding shoulder, on my mom's swollen face, on me wrapped in a blanket. But they didn't see victims. They sought stolen property. "We're looking for a kidnapped white woman," the sheriff said coldly. "And her child." Thomas tried to explain, but a deputy shoved him back, sneering at the blood dripping down his arm. My mom had seconds to react. She slipped down into the root cellar with me, her heart hammering so hard she was sure they could hear it through the floorboards. She crouched in the darkness, my tiny fist gripping her finger. The sheriff's flashlight swept across the boards above us, just inches from discovery. She held her breath, praying I wouldn't cry, praying the cellar wouldn't betray us. They nearly arrested Thomas right there, accusing him of assault. But headlights cut through the yard. Lucille's pastor had arrived with 5 church elders. They stood firm in the doorway, silent witnesses, their presence a fragile shield. The pastor spoke carefully, using words like justice and fairness, knowing one wrong tone could cost him his life. The sheriff didn't back down completely. He spat tobacco into the dirt and gave a warning that chilled the room. Accidents happen to runners. Then he hauled Richard away, promising a proper hearing in the morning. But my mom knew better. Morning would never come for us if we stayed. That night, Thomas's wound was stitched by old Mrs. Washington from next door. She was nearly 70, but her hands were steady as she threaded needle through torn flesh. Her late husband had been the doctor for the colored community, and she still kept his supplies. She worked without anesthetic, Thomas biting down on a leather strap until sweat poured down his face. Afterward, Mrs. Washington leaned close to my mom. "I know what he'll do," she whispered. "They'll burn us out. All of us." She was right. By dawn, word spread, white men were gathering at the mill with torches, muttering about purification, about teaching lessons. Jerome, Thomas's co-worker, came running to warn them, the smell of kerosene still clinging to his clothes. "They're not just after you," he said, his voice tight. "They're coming for the whole neighborhood." Panic rippled through the small house. Patricia, Jerome's wife, brought blankets and food, her face pale with fear. She offered something unthinkable, her brother's truck, hidden in their barn, full tank and gas cans. He was in prison and wouldn't need it. It was their only shot. Still, my mom couldn't leave without one thing. Her grandmother's ring, the only valuable she had, hidden years ago inside a porcelain doll in her childhood attic. She begged Thomas to retrieve it. He refused at first, but she made him memorize the hiding spot, her desperation overriding fear. That ring, she swore, could buy their freedom. While Thomas prepared, Patricia darkened my skin with walnut stain, her hands trembling. "If they stop you," she said, "maybe you'll pass." My mom cried as each stroke turned me into something I wasn't, her tears falling onto my face like apology and betrayal all at once. Outside, the first torches appeared, bobbing in the distance like fireflies of hate. That's when old Mrs. Washington revealed her secret. Her late husband had built a tunnel from their root cellar into the storm drains, a hidden passage for the day they knew would come. She led them to a panel behind shelves of canned vegetables. "The mob will set fire by midnight," she whispered. "This is your only chance." My mom bundled me in oilcloth, clutching me tight. Smoke already seeped through the grates above as they waded through knee-deep water, rats scattering ahead of them. Every splash echoed like a gunshot. By the time they emerged 6 blocks away behind an abandoned cotton warehouse, the mob had reached the neighborhood. Flames licked the sky. Hymns twisted into shouts. The night glowed red with fire and hate. And still, Richard was out there. Searching. Hunting. The tunnel spat them out behind the cotton warehouse, lungs burning from smoke and sour air. My mom clutched me against her chest while Thomas hot-wired Patricia's brother's truck. The night glowed orange in the distance, their neighborhood already burning. Every scream carried on the wind. My mom knew what that meant, they weren't just hunting for us anymore. They were burning everything black in Greenville. She changed into the stolen nurse uniform by moonlight, her fingers fumbling with the buttons. If anyone stopped them, she'd be a nurse on night duty, cradling a sick baby. Thomas slouched in the driver's seat like an orderly, his bandaged shoulder seeping blood. They looked the part, but their eyes told the truth. They pulled onto the back roads, headlights off. Every shadow looked like a checkpoint. Every distant light, a trap. Then, just ahead, a real checkpoint came into view. Sheriff's deputies were stopping every car, flashlights cutting across terrified faces. "Remember the story?" Thomas whispered. My mom pinched me gently to make me fuss, playing her part. When the deputy's flashlight landed on me, he paused. My darkened skin caught the light. "My husband's Italian," Mom blurted. "Doctor at the hospital. The baby has a fever, I'm trying to get him to the next county." She shoved forged work papers into his hands, her voice breaking. The deputy squinted, about to ask more questions, when another car roared up behind them. Richard. My grandfather in the passenger seat, both of them drunk, both screaming to search every vehicle. The deputy paled. He didn't want the fight. He shoved the papers back into Mom's hand and waved them through before Richard stumbled toward the truck. Thomas drove slow. Careful. But the second they were past the barricade, Mom risked a glance in the mirror. Richard was screaming, his face twisted, held back by the deputy's outstretched arm. 3 miles past the county line, Thomas flicked on the headlights. For the first time in hours, the darkness felt thinner. But their relief was short-lived. A dark sedan appeared in the rearview mirror, trailing at just the right distance. Not gaining, not losing. Just watching. My mom's pulse spiked. "He's following us." Thomas didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both knew. When the lights of Memphis appeared on the horizon, Mom made a desperate choice. They ditched the truck in a black neighborhood, splitting up. She boarded a city bus with me hidden in a laundry bundle while Thomas walked the opposite way, a decoy. Every second on that bus, my mom prayed the walnut stain would hold. Prayed my cries wouldn't draw attention. Prayed Richard's sedan had followed Thomas instead. The bus carried us to the train station. My mom bought a ticket north with shaking hands, clutching the one thing she had left of her family, her grandmother's ring. In the colored waiting room, a kind old woman took me into her arms, rocking me while Mom sobbed in a bathroom stall. Hours later, Thomas slipped onto the platform from the far end. He'd lost the tail in the morning crowds. They boarded the same train, but different cars, safer apart than together. My mom sat in the colored section despite her pale skin. When the conductor questioned her, the old woman beside her squeezed her hand and said, "She's my daughter-in-law." The lie was delivered so gently, it became truth. The train pulled away just as police cars screeched into the station. They had escaped again, by minutes. 20 hours later, Philadelphia rose into view. Emma, my mom's childhood friend who had once been cast out for marrying a black man, opened her door without hesitation. She was 8 months pregnant herself, but she pulled my mom inside, gathered me in her arms, and told Thomas to sit before he fell. For the first time in days, my parents slept in real beds. For the first time, my mom let herself believe maybe we had a chance. But safety was fragile. A white man with a camera began appearing across the street, methodically photographing Emma's house. He was a private investigator, the kind who hunted mixed families and sold them back to the South like livestock. That's when Pastor Williams came. He ran an underground network that moved families like ours north to Canada. He told my mom the truth she already feared: Richard had been wired our location. Men would be arriving within 24 hours. The only way to keep me alive was to disappear. That night, Ruth, a woman from the church who had just lost her own baby, made an offer that broke my mom in half. She could take me as her child, traveling with a revival group to Toronto. With Ruth's milk, Ruth's papers, Ruth's grief disguised as motherhood, I would survive. My mom kissed me until her lips trembled, breathing in my baby smell, memorizing the weight of me. She placed me in Ruth's arms and let go. When Richard stormed into Emma's house the next evening with the sheriff's cousin at his side, he found nothing. No mixed baby to prove adultery. No evidence to drag her back. Just a battered wife and a black man refusing to break. Without me, he had no leverage. Years later, in Toronto, my mom got me back. I was 3, barely recognizing her, but when she scooped me into her arms, something in me knew. Her scent, her heartbeat, her voice breaking with joy, it was enough. We were finally safe. Not in Alabama. Not in Philadelphia. But in a country where our love wasn't illegal. And my mom's last words to me years later still echo. Freedom isn't free, baby. It cost us everything. But scars mean survival. And we survived.